I had done 2 retrospectives at the Museum of Modern Art, one on Orson Welles and one on Howard Hawks. And in '63, The Birds was coming out, and I asked the museum if they would do a Hitchcock retrospective if I could get Universal to pay for it. And they said yes. So I went to California and interviewed Hitchcock, and we did a little monograph, The Cinema of Alfred Hitchcock. It was the first retrospective in the United States on Hitchcock. Now you'd think that there would have been a number before that, because he was probably the most famous and popular director in the world, certainly in America. But there hadn't been any retrospectives. This was the first one. And the climate around Hitchcock was like, Alfred Hitchcock? He's an entertainer. He's not an artist. He was not taken seriously. The Museum of Retrospective changed that to a degree. It helped to change that. When Francois did his book, which was a couple of years later, I think, that helped enormously to change the climate about Hitchcock, because Francois was a very highly respected French director, and I think the American critics were somewhat intimidated by that, to a degree, you know. The book in France was called The Cinema According to Hitchcock, which is a better title, I think, because it is sort of biblical, The Cinema According to Hitchcock. And when Francois sent me a copy of it, he wrote in French to Bogdanovich, who preceded me and also aided me, which was very sweet, since I hadn't preceded him, he preceded me with the interview he did with Cada. But I guess he meant with the monograph or something, but he was very sweet, Francois. I know they had trouble with the interview that they did, because they did it in French. Helen Scott was there, and Francois spoke in French, she translated. Then Hitch would speak in English, and she would translate. And then later on, when it was all done, Francois had it all translated back into French so that he could then edit it. So it's a very important book, and it had a tremendous impact, but it didn't quite sound like Hitchcock, because it wasn't. It was a translation from the French. He really respected Truffaut, and I think also was impressed that Francois, being a hot director, was so keen on him. I think it meant a lot to him. Hitch was ignored by the American press and the American critics. They didn't take him seriously, and he took himself fairly seriously. So he was always insulted that he didn't get nominated for Oscars, when his direction was more interesting than a lot of the pictures that won. That's why when he finally got the Oscar, I think they gave him an honorary Oscar. He came out and made the shortest acceptance speech in the history of Oscars. He came out and said, "Thank you," and left. The audience got it. As he was walking off, they got it and they applauded, laughed, and so on. But he meant it. That was it. He wasn't going to bow and scrape about it. He wanted to be his own man. He didn't want to have to listen to anybody. He would listen to people, but I think he just didn't like himself for doing it.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So there's always something critical. Well, Wasserman, wanted it. Wasserman said, "We got Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. They're very hot." Well, are they? He said, "People make slices of life. I make slices of cake," he said once. And another thing he said was that the critic from the New Yorker was complaining about the unreality of North by Northwest, and Hitch said, "It's a fantasy. There's not even there's no such thing as North by Northwest on the compass." So even the title is is a fantasy. I think he wasn't really interested in reality, as he is, for example, in The Wrong Man, where he really makes a point of being realistic. It's like when somebody asked Ford, why wouldn't the Indians shoot the horses in the stagecoach? And he said, well, it'd be the end of the picture, wouldn't it? He liked to challenge himself. I think there's no question about that. And I mean, you can see it in a picture like Lifeboat. Lifeboat, I saw it recently. You don't really think about the fact that it's all in the goddamn boat. It's so interesting. Rear Windows all place pretty much in the apartment. You have to be very, very skilled at filmmaking in order to take on challenges like that. He took those challenges on and enjoyed them. I think they inspired him.